If you are unaware, you can go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Sign up at the $5 a month level and receive Unfound's episodes early and ad-free. And you get some other stuff on top of that. Matthew Adam Tuttle was a 27-year-old from Fridley, Minnesota. He was the youngest of many siblings and was known as a very nice guy. On July 18th, 2022, Matthew was dropped off at his apartment by a friend. Less than 15 minutes later, a witness saw Matthew walk away from the property. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. Nothing happens in a vacuum. I guess this is another way of explaining Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. This is certainly true in disappearances. Someone goes missing and people suffer. Yet those people aren't just the family and friends of the missing people. Eventually, that opposite and equal reaction gets to you and me, even though we might not feel it today. Because every time a police officer doesn't take a disappearance seriously, every time witnesses choose not to speak, every time people choose not to educate themselves on the topic of disappearances, which is surely something that can be studied and learned, we all will eventually suffer. Well, with Matthew Tuttle, you will hear how he was kept in jail too long, which probably led to his disappearance, which has led to the suffering of his family and friends. But it will not end there. It will eventually lead to us, and then we'll all be collateral damage. And now a summary of the case. Matthew Tuttle was the youngest of 3 girls and 2 boys. Yes, he had 4 siblings, and the age range spans almost 30 years. Matthew's childhood was pretty normal, but in 2004, his father died. Matthew was 9, and the thinking now is that this could have been what put Matthew on a bad path. Because eventually, despite Matthew having a reputation as a good person to family, friends, and strangers, he developed addictions which were with him until he disappeared. Matthew managed to hold a job through all of it. However, he also spent stints in jail for his offenses. Importantly, none of the felonies had anything to do with violence. But also due to his habits and jail time, Matthew never had a chance to start a family and had no lasting romantic relationships. So, on July 18th, 2022, Matthew had been in jail for almost a week for a DUI. But importantly, he wasn't the driver. Why Matthew had to spend all that time behind bars, even though he was not the perpetrator, is still unclear. But by all counts, those several days were not easy on him. And when he got out that Monday, Matthew grew angrier and angrier as a friend drove him home. The friend dropped Matthew off at his apartment and left. No more than 15 minutes later, a witness saw Matthew walk away from his apartment in his bare feet. He was never seen again. No one knew anything about Matthew leaving until 3 days later. When his apartment was entered, his wallet, keys, and phone were on the floor, yes, the floor, of his place. Searches of the area yielded no clues as to where Matthew went. There are so many innocent victims in disappearances, starting with the families, then to the friends, and ultimately ending with an entire civilization itself. Everybody suffers, even if unknowingly, when these cases happen. Contemplate how the side effects of disappearances can be minimized, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, do you think Matthew intended on walking off even before he got home that day? Number 2, given witnesses' well-known problems with times and dates, are we sure July 18th, 2022 is the correct day? And number 3, given Matthew's addiction, does it make the most sense that he went in search of a fix when he walked away that day? Matthew's family is open to many theories regarding his disappearance. The guests for this episode are Matthew's mother, Barb, and 2 of Matthew's sisters, Andrea and Amy. Unfound News. You may want to check out the Unfound Live from this past Monday, where I go over 2 disappearances, both of which should have been solved in days but weren't. Luckily, eventually, one of them was. Next, all of you might be interested in this stat that has come from putting together the Unfound database. For the cases featured on this podcast, the average length of time it has taken for a missing persons report to eventually be filled out is 5.5 days. Finally, Leechburg, my hometown, is celebrating its 175th anniversary this summer. On its Facebook page, there is a trivia contest being done, and yours truly was one of the questions. Yeah, I can't believe it either. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sisters of Matthew Tuttle, Amy and Andrea, and Matthew's mother, Barb. To all of you, welcome to this episode of Unfound.
And thanks for having us.
Okay, let's start here. And I should say, before we get started, we're doing this interview on Friday, June 13th of 2025. And I will say, all 3 of you, I certainly want to give all of you a chance. So we're organized with this. I'll try to remember everybody's name, and I'll direct questions. I want to give all of you, of course, an opportunity to say whatever you have to say and, give opinions on everything that's gone down. But to make this really organized, I'll try to use, names so people aren't talking over each other. That's the way I usually do it for other interviews where I've interviewed multiple people at one time. So let's start here, as we usually do when we have family members on Unfound. I like to talk about just the family in general, Matthew's family, and being that his mother is on here. Barb, why don't you go first? Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your family? How many kids do you have besides Matthew, Amy, and Andrew? What can you say about the Tuttle family?
I have 5 children.
Wow.
Amy, Andrea, with her on. I have a son, Dave, another daughter, Rebecca, and then Matthew.
So Matthew is the youngest.
Yes, he is.
Okay. And I'm not going to ask you to do any complex math on here, but what are the age ranges from oldest to youngest? What is the age span, roughly?
In their 50s to their 20s.
Wow. Big span.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And maybe when they were all younger, give the audience a little feel for everything that went on under the Tuttle roof. Pretty crazy house, or did you run a pretty tight ship? What would you say bringing up all your kids, Barb?
I tried to. You can only contain it just so much. But I believe that they had a happy, enjoyed their childhood, and have all grown up to be wonderful people. So yes. I must have done something correct.
I think so. Yeah, certainly. Thank you for that. Amy, maybe I'll go to you next. Maybe just give a little bit of your opinion on, growing up with your siblings. Obviously, there's a big age range, a big age difference between all 5 of you. What was that like, having siblings of the wide range like that?
Well, it made it interesting, right? I mean, there was certainly an age gap, but we made it work. I think we were all really, really close growing up. it changed a little bit. I have been in Indianapolis for 15 years now, or actually I think maybe a little over 15. And, the challenge with that, right, is seeing my siblings, a lot, or being able to talk to them as much as I would like. And I think that I have my sister Andrea on here, and she's important to be on here because I would say at the time Matt went missing, she was by far the closest to Matt, right? I didn't have that relationship as much with Matt just because of the distance, right? So that's definitely made it more difficult.
Okay, well, that's a good setup. Thank you for that, Amy. Andrea, how was it that, as Amy just said, you and Matthew were the closest? Is it because of age or similar personalities? What would you say?
No, I think it's just, I'm in the middle of all of them. Mm-hmm. So Amy and Dave are older than me, Matt and Becky younger, and we've just always been really, really close. I think even today with Becky, I'm really close to her as well. So it was just, I don't, maybe living the closest to them and being a little bit closer in age.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. And I will say, so this year, Matt's birthday is February 13th of 95. So in February, he just turned 30.
Okay. And maybe going back to you, Barb, when you look at your 5 kids, do you see them as all 5 kind of different personalities, very diverse, or kind of do you see some similarities between all of them? How do you look at your 5 kids?
Oh, I see similarities, and I also see differences. That's what makes them their individual selves. They're all very kind, very giving, very loving. All have their thoughts on different things, but they all get along. They're a wonderful group of children.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, let's, of course, the reason we are here, of course, is because Matthew went missing. He went missing back in 2022. So let's just talk about him specifically now. And maybe I'll go back to you, Andrea, since it sounds maybe of the, you were very close to him. Some of the things that you think about these days when you think about Matthew, personality, interests, hobbies, what did you two share in common? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that just so everybody can get to know Matthew a little bit.
Yeah, he had a great personality, very witty, fun personality, just fun to be around. He liked just a variety of things. He loved music. He loved frisbee golf. He loved fishing, movies. Yeah, just I would say maybe a little bit introverted. But yes, enjoyable to be around.
Yeah. And you said you were, of course, we've already talked about you, and you maybe consider you and Matthew maybe to be the closest, maybe the siblings, like you said, maybe because of where you are in the line there of the kids. Maybe going back to like high school, junior high school, were you close then too, or is this something that maybe developed later?
Well, yeah. Okay, so I will say this. So going back, so when Matt and Becky were little, of course, then at that point, us older kids were starting to move out or whatever.
Gotcha.
And so, so then my first marriage, my husband and I, like in the summers and weekends, a lot of times, we would have Matt and Becky at our house with us. And I myself have 2 boys. And so my oldest is the same age as Matt.
Huh.
If you're following that.
Yeah, I am.
And okay, so they were very, very, very close. And so I think because of that also is why Matt and I were the closest, is because the bond between Matt and Cody.
Gotcha. Okay. Amy, how about you? When you think of Matt, obviously you were a bit older, and as Andrew's saying, maybe you were moving out of the house at the point that Matthew maybe was becoming 10 years old. I don't know exactly the exact age difference there, but, looking at your younger brother, some of the things that come to mind, what do you think about him now? What comes to mind?
Yeah, so, I would say this. What I remember the most about Matt was when he was young, right? I was much closer to Matt. As a little kid, he was the kindest kid you ever will have met. He's a wonderful kid. I will say this. I think addiction is very tough on families, and everybody has a different role, right?
Right.
And my role with Matt, looking back, and, I have some regrets. I didn't have a lot of patience at times with Matt and what he was struggling with. I wanted the best for Matt, right? So it was very frustrating for me. Well, we love Matt, and all of us want the best for Matt. And I would say that as Matt got older and further along in some of the issues he was facing, I wasn't as close with Matt during that time. Nothing to the point where Andrea was. And of course, I would see Matt at family functions, and I would always enjoy his company. But my memories of Matt really stem from when he was younger, if that makes sense.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Barb, going back to you, of course, somebody maybe I'll just ask, and if I don't know exactly what the answer is going to be, but Barb, going back to you, what about Matthew's father? They close, not close, all one big happy family here, or what? What can we say about Matthew's father?
I'm just a single parent.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes.
And so our father passed away in 2004.
He did? Oh,
yep.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. And so Matthew, of course, then Matthew would have been very young when this happened.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, okay. Sorry to hear about that. Let's move on to this then. What about relationships? Women in his life, or I don't know what his sexuality is, none of my business. But any intimate relationships in his life? Maybe going back to you, Andrea, being that you were like the closest to him as an adult. What any women in his life or whoever?
Yeah. I mean, he talked about them, yes, but as far as if we ever met them, no.
Okay.
He never brought any girl around, and I honestly don't know how serious those relationships were. Yeah. I don't know. He did talk about them, and I don't want to get in too much to this, but I do have Matt's journal that I got out of his apartment, and in one of his classes, he had to write down some things he had resentment towards, and one of the things he did write was his girlfriend broke up with him.
Oh.
So okay. He was, just a little bit private about stuff like that.
Okay.
But as far as like friendships, he had very, very close group of friends.
Okay.
Unfortunately, a lot of them now have passed away from addiction. Yeah. Well, I don't know all of them, but a few of them I know have. But he had his same group of friends, gosh, Mom, going back to elementary school.
Yeah.
That's what we were. I mean, they were really young, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, being that it's, and we'll come back, we're going to come back to maybe what was going on in his life not long before he went missing, but being that Amy brought it up, I'm going to go back to her regarding addiction, and you even admitted as an adult, maybe you weren't as close to Matt as, you were maybe when you were all a lot younger, but can you remember, Amy, the first time that you found out that Matthew was an addict? Was it something that maybe one of your siblings told you or something else, or is this something that you realized on your own?
I think it came from Andrea, and to be very honest with you, Edward, I can't specifically remember how old Matt was or at what point, where I was in my life.
Okay.
That I honestly cannot remember. All I can say is Matt battled addiction from what I would consider probably a very young age. And Mom, you can probably attest to that more than I can. But when I think about Matt in his growing up years, he struggled with addiction, which I'd like to say, Edward, something on addiction I think is really important to my family. And we understand we're here. We want to bring awareness to our situation in hopes that we get Matt back home where we feel he belongs, right? But one thing that is very important to our family when we speak about Matt's addiction and his mental health, it's raw and it's personal for us.
Yeah.
It feels somewhat invasive to be speaking on something that is so incredibly personal to Matt, but we also understand what got us here, right?
Yeah.
And we understand why it's important, but I think what it boils down to for us is that to us, Matt is so much more than his addiction. Mm-hmm. He is such a person. He is so very loved. And we want everybody out there to understand how loved Matt is and that his addiction does not define the person that he is.
Of course. The only reason I ask is, of course, is as you would all three probably guess, we talk a lot about addiction and drugs on this podcast. 360 some disappearances featured. I'm going to say at least half of them have some, the people who went missing struggled with addiction, whether it had to do with drugs or alcohol mainly. And of course, as we know, this is many times what leads people to go missing. I'm not here to make a judgment on why Matthew is still missing here in 2025, but it just comes up, and it's something I have to ask about. And certainly we do not dwell on it any more than we have to, and this is why, we're just going to cover this just for a couple minutes, and that is it. I think it's just important. Maybe I'll just ask you this, maybe going over to Barb. For his addiction, did he go to rehab? Did he attempt rehab? Or was that unsuccessful? What do you know about that, Barb? I'm trying to straighten his life out.
He went to rehab a couple of times. And the first one, he got absolutely nothing out of. Hated it. Just was not open to it at all. Yeah. The last time, I think he probably got some out of it, but I think he was not equipped to battle it on his own. Yeah. He was living alone, and the temptations for him just became overwhelming. And he had started his getting into trouble at the age of 11. So we had several years behind us, not so much involved with drugs, but later on, certainly. So I think Matt always thought that he was in trouble. Okay, because Anoka County they would put him in jail all the time. I mean, he just about lived in jail for very, very small things, where now they shouldn't even be looked at because there's much greater crimes out there than what Matt was, blamed for. But maybe the girls can add to this. I just do not believe that Matt was open to any type of treatment. I think he maybe thought he could whip it on his own. Yeah. Some of the counselors there were of his age, which is, that didn't appear to go over well with him. It works for some, and for some it doesn't. And I don't think Matt was one of those people.
Okay. Andrea, care to add anything on to what your mother just said?
Yeah, I can. I think, not to make excuses for Matt, but there was a lot of times where he was failed by the system. And I know that sounds, but, for somebody Matt's age, and he always held down a job. That's the thing about him, he maintained a job. And for somebody like him that is working, he he couldn't get any insurance. And so there was no help out there for him. Mental health help that he needed, he got turned away for. Detox, they would put him in the hospital and help him get stable enough, but then that was it. Nobody would take him because he didn't have insurance. And so it was this vicious cycle. And I look back to, in November of 2020, we paid out of pocket a lot of money to put him into a rehab in Wayzata. Well, this is one of the reasons why this didn't succeed, is because he was still detoxing and tremoring when he went in there. That was never going to work. And then he was in there for, I think, 2 days, and he called me in a panic because there was a COVID outbreak there. Oh. And so they put everybody on a bus, shipped him down to, like, the Excel Center. Well, but, you know, he was tremoring really bad. His anxiety was through the roof. Then they couldn't go to any groups. They all had to sit in their room. And so he was calling me at all hours of the night. Like, he needed help. He needed... He truly needed, like, he needed something to calm him down and help him withdraw. But see, when you're in a state like that, that isn't going to work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so conducive for Matt to heal in any way, shape, or form at that point.
No, and so the only thing that they would allow us to bring there was, like, supplements or herbs. And so I had my husband's mom go get, like, valerian. I did a bunch of research on, like, natural calming. And she went to Walgreens and, you know, went and delivered a bunch of stuff to him. But it was like, that wasn't going to work. You know, and I just think, like, it's such a cycle when you talk about addiction. There's always so much more than just addiction. There's mental health.
Yeah.
You know, and that was his biggest thing. His biggest obstacle was that. And until you compound that and you fix that, the addiction's never going to go away. Because he was constantly fighting demons. And when you look at, like, the family dynamic even, it was like he was really good about pushing everybody away, unless you were like myself or my mom that would just show up at his apartment. But see, to him, he, compared to maybe the rest of the family, thought he looked like an outsider. He thought maybe we judged him because none of us went through addiction. You know what I mean? It was like, again, it all goes back to mental health.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to stop me from
talking.
No,
that's right. No, this is, no. I agree. And as a person who, really studies disappearance, just doesn't feature them on this podcast, but really studies them, gets the nuts and bolts of why people go missing. And it's certainly there are a lot of connections between mental health and addiction. And, one leading to the other, is it chicken or the egg, which came first? And a lot of times it's difficult to tell. It's very difficult to tell. Yeah. Yes, I agree. Let's maybe turn to something a little more positive. Why don't you talk a little bit about, being that you brought it up, Andrew, I'll let you continue. Him keeping jobs. What kind of jobs did he have as an adult? What did he do?
Yeah, he worked, I think, I'm trying to think. The only job he had, Mom, you might correct me on this, but he laid flooring. He worked for Jerry's Flooring, like laying carpet and linoleum and stuff like that.
Huh.
Yeah.
And, again, it was like, well, no, where was the very last place he worked, Mom? It was like a factory.
Okay.
Yes, it was in Fridley.
Yes.
Right there in Fridley.
He walked there, yeah.
Okay. All right, so he had a job, even though he was struggling, he was still finding a way to get to work when he had to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will say, Edward, too, like going back to 2020 when he went into rehab there, it was a gal at work that he worked with that actually found our sister Becky on Facebook, reached out to her, and then she called, but it was her that said, as Matt's employees or whatever, like, we think he needs to go to rehab because they were thinking he was showing up to work and had been drinking, but he was still showing up every day. So they started a little fund at his work, and they together came up with $1,900.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, and then it was like we paid the rest. But it's like that gives you a good insight about Matt.
Yeah,
like
people cared about him. Yes, people cared about
him.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I think that is hard also about, and I think you could call it to some degree like a functioning addict. Maybe I say that a little loosely or whatever, but he always held down a job. He had his apartment. He would make his trips to Walmart that were kind of comical, the things he would buy. Just like he survived.
Yeah.
Okay. And sometimes you think that, these people are just, out on the street corners or whatever, peddling for whatever, but he wasn't doing that.
Okay. Amy, I'll bring you back into this, and once the only reason I'm asking is because this is a factor in his disappearance, is he seemingly went missing the day of or the day after, that night after he got out of jail. Just in general, Amy, when we're talking about his legal issues, are they mainly concerning drugs, or how would you overall in general explain his time going to jail? For what reasons?
Well, it's my understanding, and Mom, chime in if I'm wrong, but what he was in jail for this last time, was it related to drinking?
It was drinking, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yep.
Okay, was this some sort of a DUI or public drunkenness, or?
A DUI.
DUI,
yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I can elaborate on that a little bit with this last time that he was in jail. So there was a driving incident, which I believe he was with somebody, and they hit somebody's mailbox, and Matt got in trouble for that. Well, then this is kind of where his demeanor changed a little bit at the end of this jail stay, is because it ended up coming to be where they had a camera, a ring camera, whatever, that caught that Matt was not driving. He truly wasn't driving. Anyway, long story short, he went back to court, and then he was going to get out of jail. He was supposed to get out, I think that Thursday or Friday, was it? Well, anyway, you know how the courts work, and the paperwork took long, and he ended up staying through the weekend until Monday, and he was not happy about that because he thought he was going to get out on Thursday or Friday.
And I think that's important, Edward, because it sets the stage for his mental health.
I think it does. I agree. Especially, why is he getting a DUI if he wasn't the person behind the wheel?
Correct.
Well, I think they had left the scene, didn't they, Mom?
Yeah, well.
I will say a lot of his, I would say the majority of his legal issues had to do with drinking, I think, as opposed to drugs.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you for that. All right, so this is why he was being let out of jail due to this DUI, and we'll get into maybe was he going to be going back to court a little bit later. Okay. What about this person who we don't have to use any names, totally up to you. But this person who picked him up from jail that day, maybe Barb, who was this person? Close friend of his?
Very close.
Yeah.
They've been friends since elementary school.
Wow. Okay. This was not the person who also was charged in this DUI, or was this person, what kind of friend was this to Matthew?
He was a very, very good friend.
Oh,
Matt.
okay.
They were very close. They hung out a lot together. When Matt was in jail, his friend and I went over there and cleaned his apartment, and just a very, very nice gentleman.
Okay. So you would say, in your opinion, as Matthew's mother, you think this was a friend that was looking out for Matthew's best interests?
No doubt.
Okay. All right. Going back to you, Amy, if you can say, just in general, for the year 2022 when he went missing, just in general, of course, you're not living there. If Matthew's doing things, and with anybody in your family, you're just, emailing, messaging on Facebook or whatever, finding out about what's going back in Fridley. Your feelings about Matthew in 2022 regarding his overall demeanor. Were you getting a feeling that things were getting better for Matthew, worse for Matthew? You look back in early 22, and what do you think?
So if I look back in 2022, I think that was the year I probably, unfortunately, spoke to Matt the least.
Oh.
I had known at that point he had gotten himself into trouble. And it was largely Andrea at that point that really stepped in to help Matt. I had talked to him a few times, and I would see Matt at family functions, but as far as his day-to-day, I wasn't as involved in.
Okay. All right, so Andrea, your opinion on the year 2022. In your opinion, were things maybe getting a little better for Matt, or would you say things were getting a little worse? That first half of 2022, how would you describe it?
I would say things had gotten worse. So going back a little bit, 2020 he went into rehab, and then in 2021, this was right around May of 2021, I was in Minnesota for my sister's baby shower, and Matt ended up in the hospital. He was from drinking, and I went to the hospital with him and went through days of working with social workers or whatever. I did end up getting Matt insurance, talked him into having a stomach scope done, which he agreed to as long as I'd go with him. And so then the doctor put him on stomach medication, and he was starting to feel better. And him and I kind of had a little bit of a falling out, because one night when I left him at the hospital, I called the hospital later to talk to him, and they said he had left.
Wow.
And so I called him, and he answered, and I was just like, Matt, whatever. But we still continued, I still got his medications for him, made sure, was communicating with his doctors. My mom was taking him to appointments to get his stomach scanned, because he'd go in every now and then. But he was doing good because he was feeling good. You know what I mean? He was going to AA. He found a group of guys that he really liked. But see, then here's where that pattern would come in again, is that you would start to get less and less communication from him. Yeah. And that's when you would know that he was on that downward spiral again.
Yes.
I just remember after that, my husband and I went to Minnesota, and we bought him a kitchen table, brought it to his apartment, and, my mom and we had set up his apartment so cute, and he was so proud of it, and it was he was just so happy, in that he was doing good, he was feeling good, all these things. And then,
Then 2022 happened, and things got worse.
And then things got worse, yeah.
Okay,
yep.
And culminating, I guess, in this DUI issue, which, once again, he wasn't driving, but they left the scene, and, that's going to have its own problems. But I don't know, if you're a passenger in a car and the person's drinking and driving, hit something, drive away, I don't know as a passenger what you're supposed to do about that. What's he supposed to do? Jump out of the car when it's moving? It's
Right.
it's a little hard to understand, but okay.
But I think also, just to say one thing too about that, Edward, is that wasn't the only thing. It was like drinking incident on top of another. It was like one legal battle wouldn't really get totally resolved because it takes forever until another one was getting compounded on top of that. So, I think that also was part of it is, he was on probation. Well, you can't get in trouble when you're on probation, so we can't say that the law was unfair to him because that's not true either. But, it's just in that circumstances, what happened at the end of that jail time tipped the scales a little bit for Matt.
A little bit of
mental health.
Like the saying, a straw that broke a camel's back or something like that.
Kind of, yep. He was so excited to be getting out, and then he had to stay in there longer, and he was depressed and upset. But then he did get out, and I think when he got picked up, and from what people recall seeing him that day, his demeanor was fine until he got home.
Okay. Being that we're now up to July 18th of 2022, so my understanding, once again, you are the experts on his disappearance. I am not. I'm here to be knowledgeable about it, but ask the right questions so all of you can express your feelings and knowledge on it. My understanding is he got picked up, as Barb already talked about, by this guy who is well respected, it sounds. And Amy, my understanding is that they went to the bar. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's where Matt was getting picked up by his friend, was at the bar.
Okay. And Amy, what is your understanding about the timeline for the rest of that day? What's the best thing? Almost 3 years now since this happened. What's the best information we have on that day?
And with 3 years, some of these details have gone, right? I mean, I can't specifically remember what time his friend picked him up. I can say this, once Matt went missing, his best friend and I talked almost every day, and I can say this, he got to the bar to pick Matt up and noticed Matt was intoxicated. At that point, they left to drive back to Matt's apartment, and then as they were driving is when Matt's demeanor had changed. He seemed to be happy. He had gotten out of jail. Things were looking up, and then as they were driving home, his friend had told me that's when he noticed Matt's demeanor changing.
So he got a little darker, sadder, maybe not. None of us are, maybe, at least I'm not a doctor of psychology, but maybe depressed, maybe looking depressed.
Could be. I just know his demeanor had changed, and he started to act, the way he explained it was angry.
So I might understand that Matthew got out of jail and he went straight to the bar?
Correct.
And so it's like bar was like just down the street or something like that?
It was across the street, and he was waiting on a ride.
Okay.
Waiting for a friend to pick him up.
All right. And just maybe so all of us understand, we understand that he thought he was going to be getting out at the end of the previous week, and that didn't happen, and still a little bit of a question mark there. For how many days was he in jail before he got out? Was he in there a week, 5 days, 7 days, 9 days, 10 days? Do we know?
Do you remember? I can't remember now.
I don't think.
Please. Andrea, if you know, Barb, if you know, maybe give it your best guess.
My guess is 10 days. I don't think it was
pretty
2
long.
weeks.
Pretty long.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with.
Barb, you think that's correct as well? About 10 days?
I do. Yes, I do.
All right, so we can maybe understand him happy to get out. Of course, what concerns us is this friend of his saying, the closer we got to home, I guess the word was angrier he got. Okay. Maybe I'll now go to you, Andrea, being that Amy has set some of this up. What is then the understanding about this friend dropping off? What is your understanding about, did the friend hang around or just drop him off? What did he think that Matthew was going to be doing for the rest of the day? What do we know about that?
I don't think he hung out there for very long. I think he was just there for a little bit, and I don't know that he knew what Matt was going to do. I think he just...
For 15 minutes. I do know that.
Okay.
Not long.
Yeah, and then he left. And, I mean, the thing is none of us were involved with that day. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This all came to light already after the fact.
Right. These are things you learned later, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that he was the last contact with Matt, and I mean, I think it's fair to say if he thought Matt was going to do something bad or was in that horrible of condition, he wouldn't have left him. Mm-hmm. But I can't say that for sure.
Hindsight
So what
2020.
I can say this from speaking to his friend. When he left the apartment, he assumed Matt was going to bed.
Okay.
Barb, I want to bring you into this. What is your understanding there? Of course, I read that the way you understand it, Barb, so was it not long after this friend dropped Matthew off that allegedly, was it a neighbor or the landlord or somebody like that saw Matthew leave? What do you know about that?
Okay, this happened on Monday,
Okay.
and Andrew and I both, we knew he had gotten out of jail. So we both kept calling him, and it always went to his voicemail. So on Thursday, I was in that area, and my assumption was, and I don't know why, but I just assumed that he had gone back to the job that he was working.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what I assumed. So I stopped over there, and when I had cleaned the apartment, I left one of the windows open just a bit. And so I was calling Matt, and the guy that, he's not the caretaker, he resides there. The caretaker had left and moved, and he said, Matt's not here. He said, he left Monday. He ran off on foot, and he hasn't been back.
So he's saying like the day before. He's saying the day before he saw Matthew walk away by himself.
On Monday.
On Monday. And
yes.
Please remind everybody, and for me too, what day were you there? Please. Thursday. So 3 days later.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Barb, I have to ask, of course, when you went over there, it sounds to me maybe like you were a little concerned, being that you were calling him and he wasn't answering. Were you a little concerned? Is that what you were thinking going over there, see what's going on?
I was, but like I stated, I assumed that he had probably gone back to work.
Yeah. Okay.
At his job, and so when he did that, he worked into the evening, so it wasn't unusual for him to sleep during the day and work at night. So I certainly wasn't expecting what I ran into.
Right. Andrew, what do you remember about those 3 days? Of course, it's not quite 3 years ago from that Monday to Thursday. You were trying to call Matthew too. What do you remember about your feelings regarding that?
Yeah, I don't think, honestly, I don't think I really thought a whole lot of it, because again, Matt was also a young guy. His phone skills were not the best. We're more apt to probably get a text from him, if anything. Not the greatest communicator out there. Okay. So for him not to pick up my call, it wasn't, I guess I didn't think a whole lot of it. I don't think I really thought anything of it until we called his work, and they said he hadn't came back.
Do you think that would have been on that Thursday or Friday, sometime that week, or could have been even into
Yes,
the next?
that would have been that week. As soon as Mom called and said she thought something was wrong, that was the first thing we did. And they said they hadn't seen him at all.
Wow.
And then it was like, okay, this isn't really like Matt.
Yeah. Okay. Barb, going back to you, when you get there and he's not there, are you able to go inside? Is it locked? Can you walk inside and and if you did, what did you see?
I didn't go inside that time.
Okay.
I went directly to the police department and the missing person report.
Okay.
I did go back there, I don't know, some days later, and all of the fans were on. There was an air purifier that was going at high speed. The door was unlocked. His billfold keys and wallet, yes, were laying on the living room floor.
On the floor?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But his phone wasn't there?
Yes, it was.
It was there. All right, phone's there, wallet's there, keys there. And for some reason, some of those items are on the floor. Not on a table, not on a couch, not on a dresser. They're right there on the floor.
Right on the carpet.
Okay. All right. So you contact the police. Amy, I'll bring you back into this. What is your understanding about, the police? I realize you were not there in Minnesota at this time, but, I want to include you because you're kind of the outsider on this. Your impressions of those first few days when you find out that Matthew's missing. Of course, I guess nobody knew until like 3 days later. Work knew, but you, the family, and the most important people didn't know. Your impressions, viewing this from Indiana.
Well, it was just difficult. I mean, it was probably one of the toughest, since I had moved away, one of the toughest things I had been through, right? Because when I found out was after my mom had gone and filed a missing persons report, right? So, I mean, it's twofold. Not only at that point do I have a brother missing, but I have a family that is hurting and in a lot of pain, and there's not a dang thing I can do from here.
Yeah, right.
And social media, which I understand that's huge, right? But when you have a family that's going through all of that and you can't get there, there's nothing more grueling. It's easy to be away when your family is healthy and thriving until they're not. That was rough, really rough.
Right. And so you were talking a lot, I guess, with Andrea and your mother about all this, trying to just keep in touch as much as you can.
Yep, and then of course, from that point, then my focus was trying to get home. There were church parties going and things like that.
Okay, I'll if you maybe Amy, to continue with you, maybe you could speak for your other two siblings, their reactions to this, and do they live nearby or are they in other states as well? How did they react to all this when your mother shows up, Matthew's not there, and then a guy who I think is believable says, he hasn't been here for some days. Well, how did your two other siblings react?
Well, I mean, I think so. Andrea and I are the only two out of the 5 that have moved away. So she's in North Dakota and I'm in Indiana. So my brother Dave and my sister Rebecca are still in Minnesota. And so I know my sister Becky was able to jump in right away, and she knew some friends of Matt's and where he hung around, and so I know she stepped in and helped, and she was able to be there for my mom when I couldn't, right?
Yeah.
But I think we were all shocked. I mean, until you go through it, it's really hard to explain. And when I found out was the minute my mom was at the police station. But up until that point, I can't say that I would have been as concerned, because to my sister's point earlier, not hearing from Matt was not abnormal, right?
Yep.
We would go through periods, especially in the midst of his addiction, where we just wouldn't hear from him. And so, but I knew it was serious. Once my mom was at the police station, I knew we had a problem.
And speaking of the police, I'll go to you, Andrea. Did they do much? Did they do little? Did they seem to care? Did they say, "Oh, he's going to come back"? How did your impressions on how they reacted to Matthew being missing?
I mean, I couldn't say enough good things about them.
Wow,
I think, considering the fact that Matt is an adult, and we would all have a right to, not talk to our family. You know what I mean? It was like to me, they went above and beyond. And even today, I think they still do. They got
great.
They got right on it. They searched part of the Mississippi River because his apartment was right by there. As far as the search parties, like my sister Becky, she organized them. And then as a family, we printed out, oh my gosh, hundreds and hundreds of flyers and just spent weekends going to neighboring towns, hanging them up in every gas station, restaurant, anywhere we could, actually. So that part we did, because you can't really expect them to do that. But, any tip that we've had, which, they've all accounted to nothing, or, there's been a couple times where people have reached out to Becky, and you'd be shocked the people out there that are just trying to scam families going through something like this. But
I know.
It's it's sickening, but they're always like super responsive and like, nope, don't fall for it. Don't, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I guess even all these years later, I guess, I mean, they don't have, I guess, any more to go on than we do, but they're helpful if we reach out to them, put it that way.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll move on to this. When was it that one of you, maybe the police, talked to the guy who picked him up? When did you find out about the story that we've already discussed, where the guy said, "Yeah, Matthew was fine when I picked him up, but the closer we got to his place, he got darker and angrier"? When did that all come out, Andrea, the way you remember it?
I can't say for sure. No, maybe they did. We talked to him more. Mom, you'll have to.
Yeah, Barb, if you have more on this, please.
Did the police ever talk to him?
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did. Okay.
All right, and like you said, what we've talked about, it was not found out until later. Maybe all of you knew that this guy was the guy who usually picked Matthew up, but this story about, things getting darker and everything else did not come out till much later then.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. I'm just going to ask now maybe some more specific questions. And Barb, I will go to you first. Of course he did some stints in jail and everything. So I just want, in general, would you say that him getting picked up the bar by this guy, was this pretty common, or the way you look at it now, was there anything unusual about this particular getting picked up that was different than all the others, Barb?
No, I wouldn't. I don't know if he has picked him up before. I know that he has several times. I think this might have been the first one, but I called the jail prior to Matt leaving and asked if he had a ride. And Matt was in the background and said yes, he did.
Okay.
And so, I don't know. It's certainly anything on his friend, because he was as upset about Matt missing as probably our family. But,
yeah, I'm not saying anybody should suspect him. I'm just saying anytime we have a situation like this, we're looking for maybe something that's out of the ordinary. Somebody, this would be no different if the person didn't have a criminal record and was going to school or something every day, and then one day this maybe young woman, doesn't end up at school, and then we start looking, well, what was different about that day than all the others? That's why I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So nothing, seemingly, good friend. Of course, none of you probably would know. I mean, did he usually go right to the bar after getting out of jail? Maybe somebody would. Of course, we know Matthew had a drinking issue, which probably shouldn't be doing. But I'm sure a lot of people, if they're in jail for a while, go to a bar after being in jail. That wouldn't surprise any of us. Okay. Regarding the apartment, and of course, Barb, you got to see it. Maybe I'll just ask Andrea, did you go over there? Maybe you can speak for maybe one of your other siblings who lived closer. That anything, we heard about these possessions that are on the ground, but anything else maybe that you heard that you think might deem unusual?
I didn't go to his apartment until after Mom and his friend had gone there to clean it. I went one of the other weekends that we were there searching for him, so I didn't see it directly after that, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know that anything directly stuck out to me, but
okay.
Again, my mom had already been there cleaning, so if you saw her house, you would know what it's like when she gets in to clean.
Gotcha. Yeah, my dad's the same way. Yes, gotcha. Yes.
Yeah, so it looked very nice when I was there.
Okay. Amy, I will go to you. Being that I guess the phone was left behind. Do you know if the police were able to check his records? Is it possible that he got home and then, his good friend left and then he texted somebody, call anybody? Did anybody check Matthew's phone records?
They did. So I know that my mom picked up so they did take his cell phone, and they did have it for a while. And then my mom was able to get it, a while later. It's my understanding they found nothing on that cell phone. Mom, correct me if I'm wrong, but nothing that would lead us any closer to finding Matt. Is that correct, Mom?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So seemingly, him getting home, friend drops him off, and seemingly, of course, maybe something got missed, or he could communicate with somebody else somehow. Maybe it's a possibility. There's nothing on the cell phone that would say he called or texted anybody after that.
Correct.
Regarding this timeline, does it sound? One of you can just jump in with this. Does it sound like Matthew walked off right after his friend left, or did it sound like Matthew was there for a couple hours? Has anybody been able to tell that?
My assumption is that he left right after.
Right, pretty fast.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Based on the timeline that his friend gave us, and when Matt was last seen, it leads us to believe that he left right away.
Really quickly.
Right after. Yes.
Okay. Now, moving on to this guy who saw him walk away, and the listeners know that when it comes to eyewitness accounts and things, I think it pays to be a cynic. But it sounds to me like all of you believe this guy, so I'm going to be inclined, I guess, probably believe this person too. But did Matthew, did they exchange any words? Andrew, what do you know about this? Did they exchange? Was it just nothing? Did they say hi? Did he describe Matthew's demeanor? How far away was he from Matthew as Matthew was walking? What can you say?
I think the guy was out doing yard work or something like that. And, I think he just happened to see him walk away. I don't know that he thought anything of, in all fairness to him, if we just see somebody leave their apartment and start walking, I don't know that we would necessarily jump to a strange conclusion either. He just happened to see him. And then I think it was a 4-plex apartment buildings, wasn't it, Mom? 4 or 8. I don't know. Matt was on the top floor or whatever, but there was a lady that lived below him that Matt would carry her groceries in. And then after the fact, she also said she noticed he hadn't been around. But again, to them, not in fairness to those people, they didn't know. Maybe they thought he, whatever, went on a trip. I mean...
Right. Yeah. If they would have known that he was going to go missing, maybe they would have done more. They, the guy would have followed him or said, "Hey, Matt, where you going?" Something like that. Yeah, right. Of course.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's Mom. Unless you remember anything differently, but I don't think anything really jumped out at him.
Okay. No, he was. It really didn't. He was. This is how he related to me was that he was standing outside. All of a sudden, Matt came running out of the door and just kept running.
Okay. Did I hear Barb? Did I read somewhere that he said Matthew was in his bare feet? Is that true? Did I read that somewhere?
You may have. I know it's been a question.
Okay.
And I would have to say probably he was.
Okay. And
probably did.
Please, I'm sorry, Barb. So you're leaning toward the idea that he probably was in his bare feet.
That's what I am leaning towards. Yes.
Okay. Andrew, going back to you, of course, as I've learned, maybe all of you may not realize this, but as I've learned, sometimes people have a tough time, witnesses getting their days straight. How confident are you that this guy is really saying that it happened on Monday? Of course, we know that Barb did not go over to Thursday. Are we sure it was Monday and that it wasn't Tuesday?
I think I'm probably pretty confident that day is correct. I think the thing that sort of maybe stood out to me just a little bit is, do we know for sure that Matt never went back there?
Right. Good point.
Well, I mean, we don't know that. Nobody ever saw him. But I think I feel pretty confident. And if he did go back there, well, it didn't amount to anything because he certainly didn't go back to get his keys, wallet, phone, anything like that. So, I guess, that was one of the other things that was kind of a downfall to us is, so he lived off his apartment building. If you would have went out of his door, if you would have taken a right and gone a little ways, that would have taken you like by the river. To the left would have been a walking trail to, what is that road, East River Road?
River Road.
Yeah. Well, it just so happens that there was no cameras around there.
Yeah.
Because the the police department, that was one of the first things that they did. Well, he never was seen on camera anywhere because around that area they didn't have any.
And please remind all of us, the way this witness from that Monday, when he left his apartment, did he go to the right or did he go to the left?
He went to the road.
He went to the road. Not toward the river. He went the opposite direction.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Amy, I'm going to come back to you on this. I read this somewhere. Is it true? We realize a lot of things get said about a lot of disappearances out there, and that these things aren't true, but I have to ask. Is it true that there was a recording of Matthew, I guess, in jail, like over one of those phones or something, that he says, I feel like I want to blow my head off? Is that just some vicious internet rumor, or is that something that's true, Amy?
Well, if it was said in any context, it would have been said to my mom, because I believe his jail records indicate the only people he spoke to while he was there for 10 days was my mom and his best friend.
Okay.
So I've heard he said, he said some things that were alarming, but Mom, you would actually have to answer what was said.
All right, please.
Yes, I can answer that. It was the night before he had been released, and he called, and this jail stint was just not a good one. He was angry, he was short-tempered, and so all 10 days. And so due to such, I didn't want to make it any worse, so I would just kind of, let him talk. Well, in this conversation, he said, if I had a gun, I would shoot myself in the head. He said, I have no car, no job, no place to live, and no money. Those were his words. And then, a second later, he said, you might as well close out my checking account because I won't be needing it.
I see. What did you say? What did you say, Barb? Barb, what did you say to him when he said that?
Honestly, I kicked myself on a daily basis. I should have said something, but I was number one. I was speechless. I was worried because he was not in a good mental state. Right. I was just so taken off guard. So I just didn't talk. Wrongfully so. I should have jumped in. But when someone is suffering as he was, I didn't know what would set him off more than he already was.
Yeah.
And I think if I could speak to that,
please.
The other thing I will say is just to kind of show maybe, I think he was speaking a lot out of just pure frustration because he did still have his apartment. I mean,
yeah,
he did.
That's
and
right.
He did still have his job.
Yes.
And we know because, my mom had access to his account for probably 6 months. He did have money in there, trust me, and he never went to take it out. So it was like, in his head, all of those things were not true. Yeah. But it's like, they were true. We were the ones that we finally had to go clean his apartment out. Because he wasn't coming back. You know what I mean? It was like, I don't know. It's just, that's what, in his mind, what he was telling himself. But, yeah, I don't know.
All right, so he's in jail. He's frustrated. I didn't even know Matthew, and I'm frustrated. If this story's true that he's in there and he wasn't even the driver, and then it gets extended, 3 or 4 more days over a weekend and everything, I'm frustrated too. But it is concerning. And as soon as Barb said that, what he said, I was thinking, well, he did have a job, and I think he did have money, and he did have a place, and he was living on his own, and you just wonder, obviously he was not in a very good frame of mind if he was really telling himself these things weren't true.
Right, that's what I always said, yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. And I even have it in here in my notes, was this some type of joke? Of course we all have made, jokes like that about ourselves. We do something stupid and it was like, oh, just shoot me in the head. Why did I do that? This was not something like that, Barb. You did not take it that way.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Maybe this might be a little bit of insight maybe into the reason that Matthew said this. Moving on to this. Going back to you, Amy. What, this being that he was in jail for all those days and then got out, what was Matthew planning to do regarding that? Was there a future court date? Was there going to be a trial? Was he going to plead guilty? If he was found guilty, was he going to have to do a lot of stint in jail? Amy, what is your understanding about that?
Yeah, well, and so that's a good question. This is what I can tell you. He did have a future court date coming up, and what we do know is he was dreading it. He made some comments that there was no way he was going back there. I cannot remember how long after he went missing the court date was. I just remember my family surrounding the courthouse by every door.
Oh.
Hoping Matt would walk in, which obviously never happened. But what the court was for, I honestly can't remember. Mom, maybe you can, but I do know he had one coming up.
Okay. Did he have a lawyer? Was he going to represent? Do we even know that? Did he have a lawyer that was going to represent him? Was he going to represent himself if he had to go back to court and take a plea or something? What do we know about that, Andrea?
Yeah, he did have a lawyer. And I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but we had been in communication with them for a while. They knew what was going on with Matt, but confidentiality rules, they couldn't really. But Matt, they lost contact. He never reached out to them again either. The thing is Matt wasn't going to have to go back to jail at that time. That's not what that court case was for.
Oh, okay.
What I will tell you this is that the Fridley Police Department, at the beginning of this, did tell us that it was going to work in their favor a lot if Matt didn't show up, because of that, they could put a warrant out for him, which they've obviously still have it today.
Okay.
Not that that's good for Matt, but what that ensures everybody is that even if he were to get pulled over in a different state, he has an active warrant here. So they would get notified of that right away.
Okay, good.
So while it stunk for us that he didn't show up, it kind of ended up being a benefit of that. But again, that was the other bad thing about it. It's like, if we could have just talked to Matt and said, you weren't going to have to go back to jail. Like, talk to your attorney. All of these things, I think that's always been the most frustrating part, especially at the beginning. It's like, Matt, all these things that you're telling yourself in your head aren't true.
Yeah.
Just reach out and let me tell you what is going to happen here, because it's not what you think. But I don't know if all this just scared him, and I don't know, but I don't know.
But it also, Andrew, I think goes back to what we talked about earlier in this conversation about his anxiety. The anxiety was raised, him being in jail, and, when we start, getting fear and having anxiety, there's something called catastrophizing, where we believe that the worst outcome of all possible outcomes is what is going to happen.
Yes.
It's very common, even for people who aren't in jail and who have never done drugs and everything else. This is part of the way the human mind, it's part of our fight or flight response system, the catastrophizing that he seemed to be doing, seemingly when he was talking to Barb, while he was still in jail.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yes,
Yeah.
He could talk himself up into these. And,
Right.
I think about this a lot, going back to 2021 when he was in the hospital. I remember getting there that day, and the doctor was outside his door very frustrated with him because he needed to have a scope done, but he wouldn't do it. And she's like, he's all yours. You got to talk to him, whatever. Well, I went in there, and it took almost all day. He was crying. He was so certain that when he went under anesthesia, he wasn't going to wake up. In his head, that's what he believed. It was that anxiety, that fear. And it was like, after hours of pleading with him, that's how I got him to do it. They actually let me go in the room with him. That's the only way he would do it. But he was talking himself into the fact that something bad was going to happen. And I was trying to turn it around that, no, this is something that's going to be good for you. You need this for your stomach. But it just got you such an insight of that anxiety and that talking himself up into... Yeah, it was like always something bad. Always something bad was going to happen.
Let me ask you this then, Andrew. Of course, he got this stomach test. I just want to see what his response was when it turned out. I guess this stomach test turned up negative. I mean, there was nothing wrong with his stomach, or what?
Oh no, there was something wrong with it.
Was.
He had a lot of ulcers.
Right.
Yes.
But okay.
Yes, but that was the thing, and that's what I was trying to tell him.
Yeah.
Is because he was throwing up, he was vomiting blood, he was sick.
Yeah.
And I was trying to tell him, they can't give you anything for that unless they go in there and look. Well, when he saw that then and did realize that then it was like, yep, then he understood. But the thing is this is just, it's kind of funny looking back on it, but it was like, every time I was there at the hospital, his biggest concern was whether I had my mask on. Like, I had to have a mask on and gloves because of the germs and COVID. But that's just the way he was, like.
A lot of people were like that. A lot of people were like that back then.
Well, but that's just the kind of person that he was, like, he cared more that I kept my mask on and that I had my cloth mask on, but he made me take that off and put on the, whatever they were wearing because mine wasn't. But that's just the kind of person Matt was, like, he didn't want the fuss over him. He wanted to make sure I had the appropriate mask on.
Right. He's the one with the stomach problem, but he's more worried about you.
My mask, yes.
Yeah, your mask. Okay.
Yep.
Barb, I'll go to you. Of course, I have a very experienced audience, and of course, I'm very experienced with disappearances, having done this for almost 9 years. And if we always get a little worried when we hear about somebody going missing, especially if we're to believe the person walked off, and you hear about a major body of water, a river, or an ocean nearby, we always get worried. But and I understand that was searched. But Barb, knowing your son the way you do, let's just say that he really walked off. That life was getting too much for him. He wasn't suicidal necessarily, but just wanted to get out. Maybe felt cornered or something. Were there any areas, places in Minnesota or elsewhere that he had visited, ever expressed any interest of moving away? Maybe you can talk about that.
He always said he wanted to go to California.
Okay. Had he ever been there?
No.
No? Okay, just kind of an idea, like, I'd like to go see that state someday.
Oh, yes, he mentioned California many times.
Okay. And what about, Fridley, does it have a homeless population, or is there a, Minnesota, didn't look necessarily at the map yet regarding where Fridley is in Minnesota, but are there any other major cities he could have gone to if we're thinking, could he still be homeless? Of course, people are homeless for many, many years. Any thoughts along those lines, Barb?
I have thought of it. And knowing Matt the way I think we do, is that he could probably live there. He doesn't require a lot to survive. However, I know the state is really, they're doing everything they can to find housing of some sort for these people. Now, whether he could be homeless for going on 3 years, I rather doubt it. Was he at some point in time? He may have been. Like I said, his requirements to go from day to day aren't real huge.
Aren't big.
So, but not for 3 years. No.
Okay. All right.
And I will say, too, kind of to feed off of that a little bit, like around that Minneapolis-St. Paul area, the homeless encampments or the places that we suspected might have a bigger, like drug crowd population, if you will. We parked outside of them and even walked the streets of some not really good areas for numerous weekends. Just on the lookout or whatever, just, nothing ever came of that. But, and we handed out flyers everywhere as well. Not that he still couldn't be there, but we did tried to check into that.
Okay. Amy, I'll start with you. How difficult of the last course you went missing? It's going to be coming up on 3 years here in another month. Yeah. How hard has this been for you, Amy?
Well, so I can say, this from my perspective. My emotions go from, sadness to anger. I'm sure we all know it goes without saying. Every day my mom is living what's probably any parent's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
right? And there are days that makes me really angry, but then there's other days it makes me really sad. I'm sure Matt's probably the first thing she thinks about every morning and the last thing she thinks about before she goes to bed. And there's a lot of emotions that come with that, right?
Right.
But I'll say recently, you know, it's hit me how she continues to show up for the rest of us every day throughout her pain. You know, she's got 4 other kids. And even at our age, you know, there's times we do need our mom. And I'm sure there's days that are harder than others, but she finds a way to be present for all of us. And I'm sure that's really difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's rough. It's rough. Like I said before, you know, I'm 11 hours away from my mom. I'm 13 hours away from my sister. I can't, they're having a bad day. I can't walk in the door and hug them, right?
Right.
The best I can do is give them a call. And, you know, it's hard being away from your family on a good day and when everyone's healthy until they're not. And it's rough. It's rough.
Andrea, I'll move to you next. Maybe I want to ask you this, Andrea. Has there ever been a time, of course we hear a lot about this on the podcast, when we have people who have had addictions and then they go missing, but, you know, family often has stories of how it was not uncommon for this person, John Smith, to go missing, you know, for a couple days and then come back and then go missing a couple days, come back. And then, of course, one day John goes missing and doesn't come back. The way you look at it, has Matthew ever gone missing for, of course, it's been almost 3 years, but even for a few days, you know, back in the day, you know?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. You know, I think all of us could say there was probably months that we wouldn't hear from him. But what I will say, the thing is I will say about Matt, and, you know, I could talk for hours about, you know, the whole mental anguish of this. But what I can tell you for Matt is, in his right mind, he would never have done this to my mom.
Okay.
I agree.
He would never have gone 3 years and not reached out to her in some capacity.
Agreed 100%.
Now, you know, the other thing I will say about this, and knowing Matt the way you know, one of my biggest fears I had in the beginning of this was the fact that he didn't have his cell phone.
Yeah.
I know him with passwords. I know myself with passwords, right? You know, I mean, I couldn't even tell you right now my sister Amy's cell phone. I mean, I'd have to think about it for a bit, but knowing Matt, I knew without his phone, he was not going to figure out how to get a hold of any of us. However, Mom has a landline. And I know Matt would know how to get a hold of her, you know? So it's like, what was it uncommon for him not to reach out to us? Yes. For her, no.
Okay.
That's, you know, when you go through every scenario in your head, it's, yes, there was addictive behaviors there, obviously, but Matt with my mom, he just wouldn't have done this.
Okay. And Barb, I'll ask you, how tough have almost the past 3 years been?
It's been tough. You know, I always heard that losing a child is a parent's worst nightmare. It goes far beyond that. I think about him all the time. I wonder where he is. I wonder how he is. I wonder what happened. Why? There's just no closure. Our family has no closure whatsoever. I'm not saying that what we would hear would make us, you know, not sad, but leaving you just hanging without no answers it's awful. It's terrible.
Okay. Do you have a Facebook page, website, anything like that set up for Matthew's disappearance? If so, why don't you tell the listeners about it right now?
we don't have one, and I'll kind of explain why we don't. I think one of our things at the beginning of this was, and again, when you're going through something like this, you're trying to go through whatever angle you can. But we were all posting flyers on our Facebook page, on his Facebook page. But then when we kind of came back together and regrouped about it, it was actually my son Cody who said, Matt wouldn't want this. If you know, the one thing he's like, on that flyer, it has the Fridley Police Department's phone number on there. Mm-hmm. Well, again, in Matt's head, if he saw that, that's going to push him further away, because he's not going to look at it like we're trying to find him. He's going to look at it like, oh crap, now I'm in trouble again. Yeah. So then we laid low for a little while, left the stuff on our page, but thought, okay, let's let the dust settle. If we did scare him off, let's just stop with the posting for a while and see if that'll, you know, make him reach out. So that, a little backstory of why we didn't do that, right, wrong, or indifferent, but that was our thinking at the time.
Okay. All right, you're entitled to think that. No judgment here at all. And it's certainly true in many cases when we have people go missing, and if they did have some mental health issues, it very well could be that if they find out somebody's looking for them, that could just cause them to run more and run farther away. That is certainly something that could be true. Yeah.
He is in the national database for missing persons or whatever that is. Mm-hmm. He is in there.
Yeah.
But again, like the police department has said, this is what has opened our family up to getting these ransoms, is because these people have access to that, and that's how you get targeted from that.
I would say you need to be in NamUs. Me personally, I mean, you know, these scam artists, and certainly we've talked about that on this podcast before. You know, they get to families through a variety of ways.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know how common the NamUs database is, but I don't think that would stop anything, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think, you know, Matthew's on there. I think that's a good thing. I know he's on the Charley Project website as well. Yeah. Okay. Any final words from all three of you before we complete this interview?
From my end, Edward, no, I just want to personally thank you for allowing our family to spread awareness to the situation, and we'll continue to remain hopeful we get Matt back home where he belongs.
Thank you. Andrea?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. You know, any help from here on out is, just all we can do is hope and pray and get some resolution here.
Okay, Andrea. And Barb, you get the final word.
I thank you very much, Edward, for allowing us to be part of this. I will all look forward to listening to it when it's completed, and I hope that someday Matthew comes to the door.
Okay. I thank all three of you for being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
And that was my June 13th, 2025 interview with the mother of Matthew Tuttle, Barb, and two of Matthew's sisters, Amy and Andrea. I thank them all for joining me and all of you on this episode. I made a map analysis video for Matthew's case. You can now find it on Unfound's YouTube channel. I think you can now see why I made the title of this episode what I did. Of course, over the past 9 years, I could have given every episode that title. However, given that you got to hear from 3 family members, which is rare for Unfound, you got an even deeper view of the effect of a disappearance on a family, and how things will never be the same. As for Matthew and his case, yes, there is a lot of bad in it. His addiction, his criminal history, how the justice system treated him during his last stint in jail, him walking off in his bare feet. But there is some good news. The odds of Matthew's disappearance being foul play are very, very low. Also, this disappearance isn't that old. So there is a chance that Matthew is out there alive. We also have to consider that the reason Matthew is missing is because he'll do anything to keep from going back to jail. Hey, it's a common reason for criminals to lay low. And most of those criminals end up being alive. So there's hope. And hope is a way we can keep the collateral damage to a minimum. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Matthew Tuttle, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.